The last part of Chapter 22 we're going to look at is how the United States is going to expand interests in Asia and Latin America. In previous chapters, we've looked at how we annexed Hawaii, purchased Alaska, received the Philippines, and interest in Cuba and Puerto Rico, right, through the Spanish-American War. This section is all about how we further expand and exert our control on our colonies. Right? If we look back to the beginning, right, when we draw back to how the United States becomes involved in the Pacific, it all starts with trade with Japan. Commodore Matthew Perry, okay, as he sets out throughout the Pacific, right, he establishes trade relations with Japan, which then opens up, benefits both. It opens up the United States access to the Pacific. Okay, we now want naval bases or refilling stations back and forth on our way to Japan, but it also opens up Japan to Western powers Western ideas. Now, before this period, Japan was very isolated. They really didn't have any contact with the outside world, but thanks to the United States, they begin to modernize, and they now emerge as a world power as well, which then leads us to China. Okay, Japan and China being close geographically, Japan begins to exert its influence on China, and then other European nations are going to get involved as well. So they are going to set up what are called spheres of influence. Now, in the 2 chapters ago, we talked about monopolies, where one business has absolute, complete control over a particular industry. It's kind of the same idea. Within a sphere of influence, one country has exclusive or monopoly over the trading rights in that particular area, and no other country can get involved. So this cartoon it does look kind of funny because it looks like they're carving up a pizza, but if you look more closely, okay, the pizza is going to say China. Obviously, the spelling was intentional. And these are European, and here's Japan, European countries that are carving up Japan or carving out slices of Japan that they and they alone are going to have trading rights to. And obviously, you can see the Chinese are not going to be happy with this because that means that they can only trade with that particular country. All right, so sphere of influence is one of your vocabulary words. All right, it's a biggie. Here's a map that's kind of giving it to you in a little bit of visual terms. You can see if you look at the legend, each color stands for a particular country, right? And if you lived in that particular region, that was the only country that you were able to trade in. So the green is Germany, right, which means Russia or Great Britain could not come into this area and trade. And also anyone who lived in that area couldn't trade with anybody besides that country as well. And you'll notice if you look at the map, there's one country that is not located here. There's one country that does not have a sphere of influence, and that's where the United States gets involved. Okay, the United States is not happy that they don't have any trade with China because China has a lot of resources, a lot of wealth. So you kind of have the big 5, okay, France, Germany, Britain, Japan, and Russia, but no United States. All right, we do want access. We're continuing to expand throughout the Pacific. One of the places we want to get involved in is China. All right, so how does the United States get involved? Well, 1899, we have the open door policy, which sounds exactly, it's really a perfect name for it, all right? Opening the door to China, meaning the United States wasn't allowed to get involved in trade in China because we didn't have a sphere of influence. So in this case, the United States says, well, that's not fair. Other countries want to get involved, or maybe the Chinese want to trade with other countries. So the United States adopts the open door policy, which simply means no single country should have any kind of monopoly on trade or a particular, monopoly on a particular area. It allows the United States to get involved in trade with China. Right? Now, lots of people in China are not going to be happy with these foreign countries getting involved, and this is kind of like a more Chinese history, but it definitely deals with the United States getting involved, and you can kind of draw a parallel to what's going on in the world today, right, where people in a country aren't happy with a foreign country getting involved in their affairs, and this was kind of one of the first examples of it. Okay, you had a group of Chinese rebels referred to as the Boxers, right, and they are going to lead the Boxer Rebellion, right, against all these foreign countries that are influencing what goes on in China. And it's going to end up being defeated by a military force of a bunch of the different countries, right? But it kind of, lets you know that the people in China, not all the people in China, are definitely happy with the foreign intervention. The next part we're going to look at is how the United States is going to secure the Philippines. Now, we know we got the colony of Philippines through the Spanish-American War, right? And then throughout this time, after the Spanish-American War, we are struggling to establish control in the Philippines. First, it's located very far away from the United States, so we would have to send troops there and leave troops there, right? But they're also operating on the assumption that the United States was going to allow them to be an independent country, right? The Philippines allowed the United States to gain trade profits because we could use that as, once again, just like Hawaii, we can use that as a base of operations, so to say, all right, to be able to send our trade ships out throughout Asia. All right, and then this is kind of an interesting quote, which really draws back to Section 1 as well. The power that rules the Pacific is the power that rules the world, because there was so much wealth in Asia. Okay, countries were competing to establish as many colonies as we could in the Pacific, and that's why Hawaii was so important, Alaska, trade with China and Japan. All right, now we're going to focus in on Latin America. All right, we got a lot of colonies there after the Spanish-American War. All right. So we were kind of looking for, to balance our trade, but the United States also realized that the Caribbean was going to be important because we're going to be needing a shortcut to be able to get to the Pacific. And right now, the only way to get to the Pacific, right, was off the Pacific coast, leave from San Francisco, okay, California, Oregon, Washington. But a lot of our major cities are located on the eastern seaboard, and there's no access. Right, one of your activities in Section 3 is going to be looking at a map. Okay, the United States had to send trade ships all the way down south around, and we'll look at it on the next slide, all the way down around South America to get to the west. So they started to look at how can we develop a shortcut or give ourselves easy access to the Pacific Ocean. And that's where the Panama Canal comes in. All right, it was really, the idea came about because we were trying to grow our trade in the Pacific. We needed easier or faster access to the Pacific Ocean. We also needed to be able to protect our trade in the Pacific. So we need to be able to send a navy, right, very quickly from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. So here's the map here. All right, so if you're leaving from New York City, you would have to go all the way down around South America, right, to be able to get to the Pacific. The Panama Canal, which is going to be built right here, allows us to cut right through. Okay, you're looking at saving, almost 8,000 miles. Okay, roughly. So the canal would allow the ships to save a tremendous amount of time. Okay, but the Spanish-American War, because we were fighting a conflict in two oceans, also made it important for us to have that shortcut as well. Okay, now Teddy Roosevelt is going to be instrumental. Okay, we know that President Teddy Roosevelt, we know he fought in the Spanish-American War. He's going to be instrumental in gaining the land that's needed for the canal. All right, now the land that we end up identifying to be used, well, the French actually begin the idea of establishing a canal. The land that is deemed the most desirable is actually controlled by Colombia, and Colombia does not want foreign countries to come in and build the canal. So what Teddy Roosevelt does, and this is part of his big stick foreign policy, which you're going to look at here in a second, okay, he supports a revolution in Panama, or in Colombia, which then leads to the creation of the independent country of Panama. So the United States kind of gets involved and helps set up this country with the sole purpose of having the canal eventually built. All right, so here would be the country of the country of Panama. All right, and you can see it is an isthmus. All right, meaning it is a really thin piece of land connecting two larger pieces of land. All right, and we're looking for a canal built right through there. All right. In return for our intervention and helping them establish their own independent country, Panama decides to allow the United States to begin construction of the canal. All right, and then you can start to imagine that not everybody is going to be happy that the United States kind of really was kind of a bully in some regards, that we pushed Colombia into granting the independence to Panama in order to have the canal built. And then in retrospect, a couple years later, the United States is going to reimburse Colombia for losing Panama.